Claire, if you're ready, we'll go to you. I know you're around, but please settle in. Let me introduce Claire Lockhart. She's co-founder and chief executive officer of the Institute for State Effectiveness. She's a specialist in law and public administration, trained at Oxford and Harvard. Ms. Lockhart served as UN advisor in Afghanistan during the bond process and was advisor to the government of Afghanistan during the transitional administration, designing and managing a series of national initiatives. And you'll see that I'm being a little flexible in the 10 minutes, given that we have only 3 panelists today. Claire, perhaps maybe 12 or 13 minutes as you feel comfortable, but I definitely want to turn it over to Q&A as soon as possible. Claire, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be here, and deep apologies that I was held up. We confront a second open moment for Afghanistan. The first.
Could either pull the mic out, or do we need to?
I think it's turn on.
Have her turn on the there.
So, start to give deep apologies for being held up. In Afghanistan, the US and its global partners face a second open moment. First one being after the tragedy of 9/11, when a group of people, both Afghans and the US through the UN, tried to put together a settlement. And there have been many successes and many failures over the last years, but resulting in where we were in the fall, with both candidates, McCain and Obama, recognizing that mistakes had been made and a new approach was necessary in Afghanistan. I think I'll start with the basic principles of what we're trying to achieve, look a little bit about the successes and failures of the last years, and then turn to what should be some of our guiding principles going forward. I think one of the most fundamental principles is that what the world needs from Afghanistan, which is it to be a country of basic stability, is exactly the same thing that the citizens of Afghanistan desire. Put most simply, most Afghans across the countryside desire nothing more than to lead an ordinary life, to have basic stability, perhaps access to basic services. Right now, the average age of death is 43 in the country. People live in terrible poverty. But more importantly, they can't, as one of my Afghan friends puts it, they can't walk to the end of the street without being afraid of being shot in the back of the head. So they live in fundamental insecurity now, as they have done for much of the last 2 decades. But the opportunity here, I think, is that both what the world needs from Afghanistan and what Afghans desire from their government and from the international partnership is stability, is law, order, and justice. And paradoxically, that's why a lot of the movement of the Taliban, when I was going around the country in 2006, people from many different villages, including women teachers, saying, look, we have no alternative now but to invite the Taliban into our villages. We don't want to, but this is the only way we can protect our children, our brothers, sisters, parents from being under threat, from being kidnapped, from being in a situation isn't as bad across the country. But I think so. The first principle is this desire for rule of law. The second is, and I wrote my book with Dr. Ashraf Ghani, who was Afghanistan's finance minister from 2002 to 2004. We wrote a book fundamentally about state building. I think if we wrote that book again, we wouldn't leave the importance of state building, but we think much more about the balance between the state, the market, and civil society. If we only focus on state building and we don't give a significant importance to job creation and what are the building blocks of a functioning market and the space for civil society, I think we're missing the whole picture. Third basic principle, I think, and this relates to the key desire of Afghans to live ordinary lives. We're not talking about building a Valhalla or a Switzerland. I don't think anyone ever was. We're thinking about what are the basic entitlements of a citizen living anywhere in the world to a basically decent life. And right now that's at risk in much of Afghanistan and many parts of Pakistan. Fourth principle, before I look at the successes and the failures, is I would question, I think at the moment that there is, unfortunately, because of the insecurity of the country, there will be times when there is a need for use of force, and I say that with great reluctance. But there is an insurgency underway, and the presence of the US military and militaries from other countries and NATO's presence in the country country is going to be necessary to guarantee basic law and order and justice and security of the Afghan state institutions, and, as the Coin Doctrine centrally recognises, to secure the population, to protect the population. I would question whether we, to the extent to which we refer to it as a war, without clarifying who the war is against, and I wonder whether we need to give as much, if not more, importance to a different kind of framing, which was very much the framing that Lakhdar Brahimi, who was the UN negotiator who cobbled together the Bonn Agreement under very difficult circumstances. He's the first to admit it wasn't a perfect agreement. He had Colin Powell saying 3 words, speed, speed, speed. He had 2 weeks to cobble it together. And the UN had no manuals. We said, where are the manuals on how to do peace agreements? And they said, manuals, we don't have any manuals. So it was an improvised document. But it was framed as a partnership between the international community and the people of Afghanistan to establish a legitimate government. That's a much longer phrasing than the 3 letters of war. So if anyone can come up with a shorter framing for that concept, you're very welcome. But I think we need to hold on to that part of the partnership is about establishing a basic functioning, legitimate and sovereign government, which is the key building block, as we all know, of our current global system. Our security is threatened in any country if states around the world can't carry out the most basic of functions for their citizens and as a member of the global community. Turning now to successes and failures, I think the media is understandably gloomy. I think it's very hard to get reporters to focus on the positive. I think there is a lot of positive that has been accomplished. Number of sectors, functioning institutions have been resurrected, re-established. I say re-established because actually back in 2001 there were 240,000 civil servants in the country. One of the most catastrophic errors was failing to resource the government. So 240,000 civil servants in place, only $20 million was given to the entire budget of the entire country for the first year. Net result, wasn't possible to pay policemen, teachers, doctors even $50 a month to live. So in a way, no wonder corruption set in, because how else are people going to eat unless they take a second job? And instead, $2.7 billion given to UN agencies. Now the UN was critical as the facilitator of the peace agreement. The UN agency mission suffers from really systemic structural flaws of accountability. And one thing I think could be extremely constructive is an agenda precisely from the progressives, from the left, which looks at the issues of accountability in the aid system. It's precisely because we want organisations like the UN to function, like civilian aid to function, that we need to watch every cent and make sure that it works. And that doesn't mean tracing every cent and hobbling the people who have to do good work on the ground, but it's looking at structure and incentives. So back to successes, institution building is possible, it was possible. The Afghan National Army, the National Health System, National Solidarity Programme, the National Emergency Employment Programme, which is now called something else, the telecom system, all these are cited as examples of success, where it was quite straightforward and reasonably successful to take what existed, look at the assets of the country, and restart the institutions. Number of sectors, this method wasn't applied. Instead, thousands of small aid projects came in, and the sectors haven't worked. This is power, irrigation, agriculture, the police, and justice, broadly speaking. And the other key lacuna was absolute failure to invest in Afghan skills. Back in 2001, when the first budgets were put together, the UN and the World Bank said you can't invest any money in Afghan secondary, tertiary education or vocational training or trade schools. Why? Because of the Millennium Development Goals say that you can only, the primary education is so important, you can't do anything else. There's a misinterpretation. As a result, practically nothing proportionately has gone into training, whether it's Afghan engineers, lawyers, doctors, teachers, right down to bricklayers, masons, electricians, with the net result that we're spending tens of billions on importing Turkish, Chinese, bricklayers, masons, and billions of dollars of technical assistance, because we say the Afghans have no capacity. Well, of course the Afghans have no capacity if we don't invest in training to have that capacity.